Hello, Lalot Arcadio Rivera for Catnocturnal, and we are now on consequential ethics. Number 1. Consequential ethical paradigm generally grounds moral standards on the result or the consequence of an act. So the good is considered to be contingent upon the outcome. Hedonism is considered the pleasure principle is an example of an ethical doctrine belonging to this consequential ethics. Hedonism comes from the Greek word hedoni, which means pleasure. So it refers to the pleasure principle, and it is the doctrine that pleasure is considered to be the highest good, and the production of pleasure is the criterion of right action. In other words, if something is unpleasant, then that is not good. What is good is that it should satisfy and it should make a person happy. Number 3, egoistic hedonism combines the pleasure principle and egoism. So the hedonism there is the pleasure principle, and egoistic means that it centers on the I or the self. So if it is an egoistic hedonism, it is the doctrine that the pursuit and production of one's own pleasure is the highest good and the criterion of right action. Now, there are two forms of egoistic hedonism, the Cyrenaicism and Epicureanism. So take note of the two kinds of egoistic hedonism, as hedonism is a pleasure principle, and if it is egoistic hedonism, it means that the pleasure involves the self or the I as the center. So number 5, Cyrenaicism comes from the word Cyrene, which is the place of Aristippus, who was the founder of this doctrine. This doctrine involves pursuit of the lower and bodily pleasures. The point of this doctrine is just to enjoy as much bodily pleasures as possible. And take note, number 2, it must be immediately as possible. So there is no time, no chance for a hedonist to, for a Cyrenaicist to postpone whatever pleasurable experience is waiting for him. So one ought to double the fun, and to eat, to drink, and be merry, because tomorrow may not come. That is Cyrenaicism. However, it also includes a way to calculate as one may be justified to postpone the fun for a much better pursuit of bodily and immediate pleasures in the next. Let's now go to Epicureanism. Epicureanism comes from the name Epicurus, who was a follower of the pre-Socratic atomic philosophers Leucippus and Democritus. Leucippus and Democritus believed that all things are made of infinite number of units that are atomic, and they are considered atomic because they are indivisible, and they continue to move about randomly and to form themselves into clusters. So this is the thought of Leucippus and Democritus, and that is how Epicurus was influenced. So things are not considered to be permanent because of this nature of indivisible number of units, and they have the tendency to disintegrate and disperse. For this belief, the Epicurean focuses not much on taking pleasures, but in doing things in the absence of avoidance of pain and evil. The Epicurean gives more importance on the pleasure of the mind. not on the bodily pleasures, but that of freedom. That means the pursuit of this kind of life is to be free from worry and to achieve serenity or ataraxia. So this is what is meant by ataraxia. It's serenity. So Epicureanism considers long-term pleasures, unlike that of Cyrenaicism, which enjoys in the immediate and the much. So for instance, it is an Epicurean thought to decide to face the fear of going to the dentist rather than not, and suffering longer the unbearable toothache. So that is the distinction between Cyrenaicism and Epicureanism. Another that one must take note of is the belief we call as altruism. Altruism is the belief that everyone ought as much as possible to seek the good of others. So if you are altruistic, it means that you care for people, you care for others. It's not egoistic, and it's so unlike egoistic hedonism. This one is still about pleasure, but you are seeking the good of others. So number 8, utilitarianism is a kind of consequential ethical paradigm, and it is generally characterized as by the principle of utility. By utility, it means usefulness. But utilitarianism is also a kind of social hedonism. So what does this mean? It is a combination of hedonism, and since it's about social, then it involves the benevolence principle, meaning that it's the good that is sought after. So, this doctrine says that firstly, we ought to act as to promote the greatest balance of good over evil. So there must be more of the good than evil. But what is the good in this case? The good is considered pleasure. Thus, the utilitarian is considered to be hedonistic. So next question, whose pleasure is involved? The answer is that as many people as possibly involved. So, utilitarianism is considered to be social hedonism. As social hedonism, it is the ethical doctrine that an action is considered to be right if and only if it promotes the greatest happiness for the greatest number of people. Now, there are two kinds of utilitarianism, and these two kinds are given by Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill. Jeremy Bentham emphasizes the quantity of pleasures, whereas John Stuart Mill on quality of pleasures. What's the difference? When it comes to quantity, it means that you need to count. No? It involves numbers. It involves amount. But quality, it involves standards that or characteristics that are non-quantifiable. So, number 11, for Bentham, the doctrine teaches that much pleasure and for many people make a good moral action. So Bentham aims at the greatest pleasure for the greatest number. So the more pleasure that one gets, and there are more people enjoying the greatest pleasure, that is the standard or the ideal for the good. So, in line with that, Bentham believes in calculating. So, he considers oneself to be counted on, and all the others to to be counted as beneficiaries of the good. So if it is achieved that a greater number of people is involved for the greatest principle, then that is a moral standard that is achieved. Now, Bentham comes up with seven ways to calculate that moral good that is founded on greatest pleasure and the greatest number of people involved. The 7 ways are certainty, duration, extent, fecundity, intensity, propinquity, and purity. So what are these? This is your way of finding whether the pleasure over another pleasure is greater or has or gives more benefits and will give more advantage because it will involve more people. So first is certainty. If something brings about something good and you are certain about it as to its coming, then that is considered to be better than another that is not quite certain. Duration. If a thing gives satisfaction or pleasure over a long period of time, or one is not able to get it immediately over another, then that which does not take so long a time to achieve is the better one. Extent refers to how many people are affected by it. Okay, so the many, the better. Fecundity is the ability to produce still further pleasures. So it's like, is there an ROI or a return of investment from this particular thing? So that is what is referred to as fecundity. Intensity is how strong is it, and propinquity is how near at hand it is. So how possible that one can have it, no? And purity is the freedom from pain. Bentham considers that in the process of weighing things as to which gives the greatest pleasure to the greatest number of people, sometimes one gets involved in having to sacrifice his own pleasures for others, and there is difficulty in calculating as to which one gives greater pleasure. In this case, Bentham suggests that there should be four sanctions to consider for us to overcome our perversions and to give primacy instead to what we call as social utility, or to be really utilitarian. These 4 sanctions are nature, law, opinion, and God. So for Bentham, one will simply have to consider nature. If he needs to determine which one would be more utilitarian. Or another sanction is the law or opinion and God. On the other hand, John Stuart Mill is a utilitarian, but his principle is to have the greatest pleasure for the greatest number of people. But the greatest here does not refer to number and quantity. Mill refers to quality instead. So for Mill, one has to be choosy, or one has to be satisfied with the best. So the greatest for Mill is that which is the best. So Mill is famous for the line that it is better to be a human being dissatisfied than to be a pig that is satisfied. Mill refers to an internal sanction. This internal sanction he calls as a subjective feeling in our minds. And he considers this as that which will motivate us to behave in moral ways. So, for him, this subjective feeling in our own minds is like conscience that is considered as the ultimate sanction for moral behavior. Mill also acknowledges external sanctions, which serve as motivations or coercions for moral behavior, and they are derived from outside ourselves. Example are respect for natural order or the fear of civil punishment. So, the fear of civil punishment is that which will motivate us that not to engage in behavior that are not uncalled for or that are not moral. So, for example, fear of social disapproval and fear of God's judgment.